Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, depending on your location. Welcome to this webinar this morning on our November 2020 cybersecurity findings. So the purpose of the webinar is to give you an overview of the current threat landscape and what we found with a number of assessments, probably 10 or more, that we've conducted over the month of November. If you can all hear me, if you could just say, Jamie's, good morning. If you could just say that you could all hear me, fantastic. Audio is fine. Thank you, James. And I'd like to welcome Adam Wilmot, one of our senior technical consultants at 9, who has been leading the cyber work. So Adam, thanks for joining. I'm going to be Jonathan Ross, and then you're on my sofa, more Jonathan than Graham Norton. So if you have any questions, and please just put them in the questions tab. I'll be keeping tabs of it as we go. So hello and housekeeping. I've sort of done that. We have an app. So if you're not familiar with 9, we are a consultancy practice. I'm the founder and the managing director. And we typically have delivered consultancy services in areas of IT, strategic management, data protection, and cybersecurity. And in delivering that work, we have created a lot of intellectual property, which over the past 12 months we have created into an app. And the first module is data privacy and protection, of which you all have a free trial of, which you can register at app.9.com for 30 days. And interestingly, if you buy a license by the 11th of December, then you will also have a free cyber vulnerability assessment of your systems and services, which is extremely useful, and hopefully that also will make more sense as we go through. But the app is going to grow. It's a governance, risk, and compliance platform. If you're familiar with GRC, with the first module, obviously on data, the second module is going to be on safeguarding and child protection. And the third module, security and systems, and followed by IT management. So at a governance level, it enables you to manage your IT systems and services and your governance compliance, but also importantly, report the issues back through to the highest levels of management within the school. And that's just a screenshot of what it looks like. We've got training videos, events, curated news on what's really important for you within education. And on the left-hand side, you've got some of the features, including task management, which is a project management tool that not only allows you to manage your governance, but also will allow you to manage things like IT projects. So if you're doing upgrades, you can manage that. And as I said, you have subscriptions by December 11th, which also happens to be my birthday. You get a free cyber vulnerability assessment. So that's very useful to know. So the context behind this is we'll go through the threats that we are seeing, and then we'll talk about what we have found and our findings, and touching upon your obligations also. It's important to recognize that when we're talking about our findings, they're coming from assuming that someone who's already compromised a device or has compromised an account, therefore they are within the firewall of the school. So that's more of someone has gained the first hurdle, and we're looking at what the internal threats are for an attacker to elevate their privileges within the network. We see less vulnerabilities external to the network. So if you're looking at external facing IPs, the good firewalls generally do a good job. However, we do see weaknesses when we're looking at web application testing. So if you think about your school website and you're looking at the systems that hang off of that, the corporate systems such as Firefly and OpenApply are generally very, very good in terms of their protections. But we see quite a lot of weaknesses when you've got systems that are being developed in-house or are on open source, such as WordPress. And you can access, so if you have a website that is based upon WordPress or has in-house based systems hanging off of it, rather than the commercial providers, then you are at greater risk in our experience. But today the focus is around the situation where an attacker is compromised and is in the network, and then the vulnerabilities that we identify. Now, schools are a target, and the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK has published a number of bulletins to make schools and education organisations aware of what the threats are. And what we have seen over the since the start of the pandemic is that there has been a significant increase in the attempted or successful attacks on schools. And if you can sort of think about the typical threat landscape or the surface attack area, of a school, is prior to the pandemic, generally speaking, you had teachers and students within the confines of a school. Therefore, the landscape is size X. But when with the pandemic and with distance learning or blended learning or however you want to term it, the threat landscape has increased, with students being at home and teachers potentially teaching from home, and that not only increases the landscape and the surface area of the devices, but also the individuals. And we've seen everything from the devices being attacked through to a lot of social engineering around actors putting malware within curriculum materials that are then shared between teachers to then compromise devices. And it's important for you guys to understand this. And this report here from Microsoft in September is really useful. It's not technical, but essentially, cyber criminals are people who want money, and it's a business. And since with the pandemic, there has been an increase in people not being able to have work, or being on furlough, and their jobs are at risk. And therefore, the population of people that are interested in or require money has increased. Therefore, if you have the skills, then and you have the need, then you will use those skills to fulfill that need. And consequently, the increase in the population of attackers we have seen has increased. And then specifically, when you look at education has been a consistent performer when it comes to being open during the course of the pandemic. Most other industries have closed down, or if they have had to work at home, they already have the protections in place. Where in a school context, schools have been, in many cases, governments have been motivated to keep those schools open, and therefore, from attack perspective, it sits slightly higher in industry to attack, and that has been reflected in this report here, which is a running report from Microsoft. You can follow the URL there. But 63% of current malware encounters are within education. So that sort of tells you something, that education is under attack versus the other industries. And the score there, if you were part of a webinar in September, was 61.9%. So you've seen an increase in 1% or so in a couple of months. But it sort of tells a story that if you're in education, then 2/3 of the population of cyber criminals are focused on you, and specifically more so if you're in paid for education. So if you are an independent or an international school where you are taking money to provide that education service, we are seeing that that attackers recognize not only your defenses are lower, the attack service has increased, but your willingness to pay, the threshold is a lot easier to get you to pay, because the impact on a distance learning program, or actually on the school, of not being able to open is significant in terms of reputation, in terms of brand, in terms of impact on students, and the commercial impact as well, in terms of the parents asking for discounts on the fees if you can't operate. And there's another report that came out earlier this month, or in October, from Europol. The criminals have been innovative, sort of going back to a couple of those points there from Microsoft, to identify those of greater risk and concern, and then attack those. And this report not only touches upon the malware, but also touches on child sexual exploitation and the issues that have been caused as a consequence of the pandemic. So for those of you with safeguarding teams, which many of you have, or child protection, get hold of this report and have your child protection team read it, because it will be useful for them as well as it will be useful for you. So there's one thing to note. One of our team will be in contact with you at the end of this webinar, and they can pass on this report also. But also they can give you, if you're interested in some training for your leadership around the topics that we're talking about, we have these really cool card games, Go Fish, that's cyber poker, and A Breach Too Far, which is around understanding your data protection obligations. And when we touch on data protection law, information and cybersecurity is 1/3 of that component. So with Europol in this report, they quite clearly, their findings are correlating with what we are finding, and criminals are identifying from social engineering, as in we have seen instances where cyber criminals have joined Facebook groups where teachers are sharing materials and building up trust, identifying which schools are most at risk, identifying which regions are most of concern where they have distance learning programs, because if you have a distance learning program, your service area has increased. If we look at the news this week, on Monday, I believe, Hong Kong announced that they were shutting all their schools from this Wednesday, and therefore for the remainder of the term, all Hong Kong schools are back in a distance learning program. Cyber criminals have the same news that we do. They will be aware of this. Therefore, I would give fair warning to schools in Hong Kong that you are at a greater risk of attack than other schools, purely because now it is known that you are distance learning again, and that your surface area is going to increase. Therefore, it's easier for schools for attackers to sort of gain access to your systems. And the findings from the Europol report, and we'll be touching upon mostly around ransomware, is that it is the dominant threat for organizations. And a ransomware can cause significant disruption to you. If you look at what happened with Manchester United last week, and I think they're very fortunate that they may be getting up and running sometime soon. But if you don't understand the implications of what a ransomware can do, then you can have your school closed down for a number of weeks, if not months, and that can be very, very expensive. So if you understanding the exploitation of a ransomware and the elevation of privileges within your IT systems allows you to prepare and protect that. So not only if you have systems that are encrypted, that you can restore them very, very quickly, but also that you can limit the impact of the damage should that damage take place. So I won't go through this slide because you can see the findings and you can download the report for me to read in more detail. So generally, before we go on to the examples that we have, the tacklers recognize that within a school environment that the technical systems haven't been configured historically. There hasn't been investment in resource, in skills. It hasn't generally been seen a priority because it's not seen as something that is investment within the classroom. It's something that is seen as an additional expense. And over the terms of the pandemic, IT teams have been very much focused on maintaining distance learning programs and getting ready for another distance learning program rather than protecting the IT systems. I'm just looking at some questions there, and before I answer them, if students are sharing inappropriate things by their personal devices or social media account, how do you deal with this? So that is an interesting question. I mean, that is a more of a safeguarding and acceptable use policy issue. So as a school, you need to have a clear acceptable use and ensure that's communicated, but then also have a leadership team that is willing to act and make their behavior dissuasive from other students. It also depends on the risk of that happening. What is the likely implications for you as a school? How are your devices configured? Because that will also have an impact on the sort of dissuasive action. I know that's not answered your question, but Mohammed, please do contact us directly if you want some more information on that detail. Now, going back to the beginning, I touched upon that cybersecurity and information security are 1/3 of data protection law. So in many of the instances from where we are seeing that they shouldn't be the case, the 15 schools or so that we've assessed on the course of November, first of all, they're very good in terms of they're being proactive to understand their risks. But in many cases, they thought they were protected, but they didn't actually have the evidence to demonstrate that. So in many cases, a school will invite us in and say, well, we won't find anything, but actually we find a lot. And data protection law is there for leadership teams in schools to be able to evidence where they have identified the risk of these things happen, but also have mitigated those risks. It's not necessarily on IT. So IT is the mechanism that will protect the IT services from a cybersecurity attack, but it's the leadership team and ultimately the board of the school that are accountable. So it's important that they really recognize and understand the types of threats that are coming. And as I said, these games are one way that you can help educate them, because when many people talk about cybersecurity, they think it's an IT problem, when in actual fact, when you look at the legislation, it's actually a management issue. And these examples here that are some are from a few days ago. So you may have heard of the significant ransomware attack in Baltimore, through to back in the right hand corner there, from 2018, where independent schools in the UK have been systematically attacked, or the issue here within from Schools Week. So it's regularly in the news around these attacks, but actually it's less so than it was. So if you speak to the news outlets, they're less interested in any specific school that's been attacked, because it's old news, it's been reported. Whereas the larger scale issues, such as the one within Baltimore, because they're at scale, are more reported. So even though that you may not see specific schools within the news, doesn't mean it's happening. It's happening, but the news outlets aren't as interested as they were a few years ago. And in your obligations, when it comes to data protection law, it's all about risk. So you having the conversations with your leadership team about the current risks associated with the processing activities within the school, and using servers and cloud-based systems as a form of processing, and the current risks to you, the primary risk, I would say, is around cybersecurity. Each year we see a pattern, and you generally don't see many cybersecurity attacks during the term, during term time, but then you see an uptick when you either get to a holiday period or the end of a holiday period. So in the past 2 years, the most number of attacks happen in around the October, autumn, fall break is when we see the most of the attacks. I would guess that we're going to see a significant number of attacks during Christmas or the back end of Christmas. And what cyber criminals tend to do is they will compromise your systems and they'll find a way in, and then they'll lay multiple payloads. So if the first one doesn't work, or you end up paying for the first one, they'll then execute the second one and onwards. And that's because they do that because there are less people watching the IT systems during those times. But also the impact is amplified at the beginning of a new school term, because everyone wants to get back to school and all the students come in. Therefore, the motivation for the school to pay a ransom is greater at the peak point when schools are returning. Our vulnerability assessments, when we do them, that you get free with the app, generally look like this. It's an output that tells you the vulnerability, the description, the criticality, and the mitigating actions. But we do a full 1,000 point check of everything of your systems, which is a different service called Security and Systems, and it's been very popular in the past few months of supporting IT teams in providing capacity and capability. Think of it as a virtual chief information security officer role, but with more technical support in aiding your team to build capability and capacity. So we're like in the Christmas countdown now of who's going to chart the tops, who's going to chart top the charts even for the Christmas number one. And Adam, this is where you come into play to give us the details. So number 5 in the December charts or November charts, in terms of what we are finding, is in the vulnerability assessments and in the security systems, is weak access permissions on network shares. So could you just give us more context in terms of what we found, what the issues are, and also what would allow an attacker to do if they identify the same vulnerabilities we had?
Yeah, sure. So this month we've identified a number of external devices, NAS devices, if you like, that are hooked onto the network, which are typically used for storing media files and files not part of a central authentication platform or Active Directory. And when our tools pull these devices, we can check the shares on there. And we've identified that, particularly this month, a share where there's backups stored as part of a secondary storage platform that we'd be able to gain access to those backups, which are unencrypted. And we could use that data to download and actually start sifting through the server information, which could lead to a data protection impact if there's anything stored of sensitive information on there. There could be databases as part of that backup, which we could then mount onto our own server and start sifting through that data.
Fine. So this issue here, it sounds like an attacker couldn't immediately escalate their privileges. It's certainly a security incident and definitely a data breach in terms of data protection law, but it could lead to more intelligence of where to attack.
Absolutely. I mean, you could use this information. You may be able to get more user data or email addresses of parents from a database, which could be then used to mount a phishing attack. So it's all part of profiling the organization and the students, the staff, and the parents of that organization. That could be used for that. Okay. Another one we identified as part of a weakness within a process where users provisioned from an MIS system into another system. The actual holding point for that data, that CSV file, was a network share. We made it because of weaknesses within those permissions. We gained access to a spreadsheet which had student, staff, and parent information, which had first names, last names, email addresses, telephone numbers, and addresses within that. So again, that's a significant kind of data breach, which could be used to profile or target the parents or the staff. With data, so we have your information, we've got your address, those type of things. So, significant impact from a data protection perspective with those.
And how would you identify, like, your score? So we've got people on the call thinking, okay, have I got any of these on my network? How do you identify whether you have these issues on your network?
Well, ultimately, it's figuring out the processes that you operate in. So as part of a data mapping exercise, understanding where your key data is and how you process that data internally. And once you do that, then you need to look at a tiered access. So I've got a NAS device here. How's it managed? Have I got my permissions set? Who should have access to it? When somebody leaves the organization, how do I remove that user? So it's all about like a tiered access approach. So it might be that you have, general staff have got read access to it to pull data away from a file, a share maybe, and more senior members of perhaps the IT team or the organization have got greater access to it, and it's having that documented, so you review it on an annual basis to ensure that those permissions are present and correct in line with the organization's policy. Okay,
so that's quite a straightforward straightforward one. I know in terms of cybersecurity and elevating privileges, it's relatively lower risk, but it's certainly a data protection breach if that were to take place. So number 4, misconfigured systems causing security risks. And what have we found here?
Yeah, typically when we use our scanning services, we identify endpoints, anything with an IP address, if you like, that's got open ports or services that are enabled which shouldn't be. So things like Telnet or FTP, which we'll be able to manage these endpoints, these network switches or servers, if you like, a level which we could use command line interface to start making configuration changes or extracting some data through FTP, depending on what's hosted on there. So again, that could, as part of profiling a server or a service, we could use those weaknesses in the open ports to be able to get user information. Potentially, we could, depending on the weaknesses or open ports that are there or any vulnerabilities on those hosts, we could then elevate our privileges on that system and gain access to it.
Okay, so I know that, and correct me if I'm wrong, we've seen a couple of examples where on the hardware, the lights out management card has been, we managed to compromise the lights out management card, right? And then we can compromise the OS and then potentially the applications on there. Is this an example of where that would take place?
Yeah, and this will, I don't want to spoil any surprises, but this kind of falls into number 3 a little bit.
Right.
But certainly, if there's a weakness there with the ILO, open lights, integrated lights out system, everything needs a patch sooner or later. And ILO is another weakness where we can gain almost root level access to an endpoint, to a server, to further expose it, any weaknesses that are there.
Okay, so number 3, weak authentication mechanisms. Can you give some examples of where we have compromised systems through this?
This is a good one, and a nice easy one for us, because we can gain access to rich information quite easily. So typically we see this when a system's been implemented without any processes wrapped around it, by understanding what the system's doing and how we're going to protect it. So almost having a principle of least privilege. When you install a system, you need to put a password and a username and password on. So a couple that we've had this month, CCTV servers. We've gained access to CCTV servers with known credentials that are widely available on the internet. We've gained access to live feeds and been able to screenshot out, as part of our evidence gathering for the vulnerability assessment, footage of the school, the organisation, the campus, everything around that. So we can gain access.
So we've been able to gain access and view the children within the school through the default credentials. Okay.
100%, yeah. Another one is around building management systems. We've gained access to building management systems, and we can control certain elements of the building through those weaknesses with the authentication. So it might be an endpoint that's got light switches or door access. We can control and lock doors, because quite simply there's the username and password that is implemented is weak. Okay. Well, not weak, it's publicly available, which intent makes it weak.
So just put that into perspective, we could, if we wanted to, with those systems, we could decide to keep the doors open, or to change the passcodes, or to lock the school, or to do anything with anything with security, or even make it really cold or really hot in the school.
Yeah, completely. And we could cause havoc with that level of access. And admin isn't a sufficient username password.
I know myself. We come up. This is a common issue. We do find this with these types of systems. Why do you think it is that we're always managing to compromise these, like CCTV, access control, BMS, those types of systems?
Well, typically these systems are managed by maybe a facilities department or security department, and they're not thought of as managed by the IT. They may assist in some way, but there's no auditing of these systems. They're put in and they're forgotten about. And what our tools do, because we scan based on IP, we go to the dark depths of the network. We lift up the carpet, if you like, which gives us access to these systems which aren't typically managed by the IT, and don't necessarily have the same policies or procedures or daily checks that an IT department should take to ensure that it's secure. Okay,
and just one more. I'm just thinking there, if we could compromise this. First of all, you compromise the CCTV system, and yes, there's safeguarding issues, there's a data privacy issue here. And we compromise that device, or we're on that server, would that allow us to elevate our privileges onto other servers or other systems within the network that are the responsibility, like traditionally, of IT?
Typically, if the servers are connected to the local network, certainly we could start with the access we've got on that server. We've got a platform which we can build upon and start targeting other areas of the network. So certainly, with some time put against it, someone with a level of knowledge and the right tools could start elevating their privileges across the wider network. And just another one to point on, Mark, that we found recently, where schools put open source monitoring solutions in place and they implement a solution without the correct process in place to secure it. A great example of one we found this month was we gained access to the monitoring solution, which was, again, publicly available credentials on the internet. As part of that monitoring, it had a macro which we were able to expose through the solution, which gave us root access to their ESXi host. And because of that, we gained access to all of their virtual servers. We could actually view the console on that. If someone was using that server, we could view it quite plainly on the screen. We could shut them down. We could delete servers. We could access, the data stores that connected to the SAN. And again, we're not the bad guys. We're the good guys pretending to be bad guys. So we could cause havoc across the network quite easily with that level of access.
Okay. So that's one to bear in mind if you have any network monitoring tools, and specifically they're open source, around the protections afforded just to accessing that monitoring tool, because there could be macros or other technology in it that is required to get the data from those other services that could lead to vulnerability.
And I think this goes to highlight where we bring a certain level of experience is that schools can run these tools quite happily. They could run a network scanning and identify the vulnerabilities or any weaknesses. Where we go the extra mile is once we've identified it, we start looking and poking more. We use a lot of manual techniques, which then go further expose wider areas. So you may identify there's a weakness with the open source monitoring. However, what further problems could it cause? What other vulnerabilities could it cause? There's a weakness in the macro which we've identified, which is exposed access to a virtual platform, and that's where we've got that level of expertise to know where to go, know where to look. It's part of that manual testing.
Fantastic. Okay, so now we're going down to the top two. Closely fought battle in the last week of single sales and downloads to work out who is being the number one. So EOL operating systems, end of life operating systems and services. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, we're still seeing this. This today we're still seeing schools running Server 2003, Server 2008. Server 2003 went end of life in July 2015, and an end of life server or system doesn't receive any updates to it, and becomes it's like Christmas for an attacker to be able to find these servers which won't have the latest patches on. They won't be supported. There'll be a weakness as part of the network, which then can be exposed to gain wider access to the network. And some schools have these servers in place for a reason, for maybe some archival purposes, but it's having the correct control in place. So it's isolating that as much as you can, only having certain users access to it, using ACLs to limit what network traffic can access to it. But schools should be planning to replace these servers as soon as they go end of life. They shouldn't be on the network any longer than they need to. As well as the servers that we identify, we see Windows XP, Windows 7, which again have all gone end of life. Windows XP 2014, again, typically on services that are managed outside of the IT realm in CCTV or access control. There's some XP machines that are running some software which controls the lighting or the heating and the cooling of the campus. But the vendors, you should be putting some pressure on the vendor in those circumstances to get them to have some software that runs on Windows 10, the latest build. There's significant weakness to the organization running those operating systems at this point.
And if you can, I'm guessing you're going to have to find a way to structure your network that those systems aren't available to anything else apart from itself, right?
Yeah,
that's what you'd end up having to do.
Yeah, 100%. So if it's financed for archival purposes, you make sure that only the people who need to access it have access to it from a user perspective, as well from a network perspective. You put it in its own VLAN, have some ACLs in place, and really lock it down, and maybe only power it on as and when it's required. Don't leave it powered on all the time where you're not monitoring it, not understanding who is accessing it. So, as and when, just in time is kind of a phrase you may hear around the IT world. So just power it on when you need it, access it when you need it, then shut it down afterwards. Yeah,
because I think it's like 7 out of 10 schools have these issues that we can then compromise and elevate our credentials to like domain admin when we with these MSA issues.
And we'll come to that in a bit, but just it's not always about Windows servers or services that we identify, but a lot of open source platforms do go end of life quite quickly, and it's ensuring that you've got the right level of monitoring in place to ensure that things that are running like Apache or Tomcat or any Postgres, that they're not going end of life, because things change quite quickly in the open source world. So it's just as important to maintain those operating systems as well as your Windows platform.
Great. And Christmas number one is vulnerabilities exposed by weak patch management. I'm guessing this will be no surprise, and certainly not any surprise from us. And Adam, can you just give us some more details about what we generally are finding with these issues?
Yeah, again, when we find certain vulnerabilities exposed through our scanning, it's like all our Christmases have come at once. We're still finding MS1710, which is the Eternal Blue vulnerability, which there was a patch published in 2017. We're still finding Blue Keep, which again was patch was published in 2019. We recently found MS1220, which was a patch was published in 2012. And all of these, essentially, there are scripts available, publicly available on the internet, which allow us to, once we've identified the endpoint, the target, if you like, we can run a script. It automatically exploits the vulnerability, and we can start getting shell access to that device, creating local accounts, admin accounts, starting to build out privileges. Typically, if we find MS-1710 on a network and we actually go after it, within about 2 hours, we can get domain admin access to a network. And again, the havoc we could cause with that is significant. If you've got an Active Directory, you'll understand how wide and far we can reach with that. So any server, any MIS solution that you have, we would have administrative access to it. And untold problems, shutting down servers, exposing lots of data is easily done when we find these vulnerabilities. And again, we're the good guys just pretending to be the bad guys, but we're telling you about them. It might be that someone could gain access to this and expose it, and over a period of months start building a payload, as you mentioned before, to create a wide attack across the organization.
Quite a few of our schools that work with us, they take the service, it's called Cyber Vulnerability Essentials, and we do four comprehensive vulnerability assessments a year, one every 3 months, because as you said, that the patch management is regular across all different types of systems, and they find that protects them quite well, or gives them a level of confidence that they're up to date with their patches, and then they can schedule. One of the issues with schools is when you can do downtime, but it allows them to then program when their downtime is going to be. Also recognize the risks associated with those patches that are residual until the downtime can take place.
Absolutely. I think it's schools have a process for implementing patches, but some are missed. Some patches do get missed. You may think that you're doing everything you can, but by running a vulnerability assessment, you're actually checking your internal processes, checking how you're patching your servers, and highlighting on your risk log that actually we need this downtime because we've got this weakness, and if we don't, the impact is we're vulnerable to exposure of data or network downtime through a vulnerability. So it's black and white. Once we run these scans, you actually get the data, which gives you all the risks, which you can then use as evidence as to why you need to patch or take this server down.
Yeah, fine. And that's an extremely low cost service. I think it costs £4,000 or something for a year, £4,000 or £5,000 for a year of 4 comprehensive deep dive tests, that full risk assessment, review with our team to support you in terms of remediating those issues. So for very low cost, then that's something that may be of interest.
And just to add that we don't just get the results and give them to you. We give you the recommendations of how you go about resolving that. We want this as a completely rounded service that not only do we identify them and apply risk based on our own methodology, you find a lot of false positives, which may not impact, and based on the exploitation ease of a vulnerability, it may not be a high risk. But what we like to do is actually give you all of the tools that you need to be able to resolve that and support you through that process.
Okay. And a more comprehensive assessment that quite a lot of leadership within our schools find is to have this type of dashboard presented to them by IT, because one of the challenges that our directors of IT or head of IT or network managers say is that it's very difficult to articulate what the challenges are and where investment is required. So I know that this type of dashboard, so this comes from the 1,000 point check that we do, allows a tech team to communicate where the challenges are, but it also allows them, they're out off the back of this is like 75 different or 100 different actions that need to be followed. But it gives them a program of work. There's a couple of things. It gives them, okay, these are the challenges within the school. This is where the investment's required. This is where the time is that we need. These are the skills that we need. But it also gives them a program of work over a period of time to sort of manage the security of their systems, but also just generally good IT management. Have you seen any of the benefits that our clients get from this type of assessment, Adam?
100%. I mean, it's baselining your organization, really, where the vulnerability assessment will identify holes in technical servers and services. We look at configuration. We actually do deep dives into the deeper configuration of the network, so across servers, networks, understanding VLANs to a certain point, and actually questioning the services which aren't necessarily managed by the IT department. CCTV, how do they manage their data? How's it backed up? How are they going to recover in an incident? Access control, all those elements. So it's a deeper dive that we baseline across the organization and build that year on year. And we start to see across the years as the IT department actually start taking on board a lot of what we recommend. And by, year 2, year 3, they've actually got a really good grasp of it. And then it's just an assurance piece, assuring the work that they do to mitigate their risks. And we go back in and say, great, you're doing the right thing. So it turns from risk identification into just an assurance piece.
And there are a couple of things I particularly like about it. I mean, the cybersecurity, the term cybersecurity is banded around a lot of times, and that it's really complex, and that you need loads of different cybersecurity skills, and therefore it's expensive to get cybersecurity expertise in. And sort of my take on it is it's not. Cybersecurity is just security, with cyber in front of it, and just building capability and capacity within your team gives you the expertise without actually having to rely on consultants. The other thing I really like about this is it allows you to achieve Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus accreditation and certification, specifically for UK or European schools. It benchmarks you where you sit if you're trying to say that you're Cyber Essentials compliant, which is a national cybersecurity centre certification within the UK. Just to give you a bit more context, if you want to trade as a business with the UK government, you have to be Cyber Essentials certified in order to be considered as an organisation. And many insurance companies are looking for Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus to underwrite you for any cybersecurity risks in terms of any attack that you may have that may cause damage or loss. So it goes a couple of steps further, and it adds a few more benefits to it. I'm just conscious of time, and we've got a couple of questions to go. There was one around cloud schools, and if we're a Google-based school and we use everything in the cloud, are we better protected? The answer to that is, when you look at the core systems and malware being encrypted, and you are more protected in that respect, but you are still at risk of losing data, and it be a security incident as a data protection breach, a significant data protection breach where data has been lost or compromised. So whilst yes, you are protected and better protected to some degree, there is still a lot of work that you need to do around credential management and also the tools that you can use within Google. So most of you, if you're using Google, you'll be using the free version. It's actually the paid for version that allows you to be GDPR compliant and give you the tools and the security features that you need. So I wouldn't rely upon the fact that you're just using Google as a means that it reduces your risk. The other thing to say is, and I picked up about this on the question, is that you do have your third parties, your processes such as Blackboard, Razor's Edge, that had a significant breach earlier this year. You're going to see more of those types of breaches take place where you are affected. And what you need to be able to do is quickly respond to what's happened with the third parties you are using, because in a data protection context, in a legal aspect, what you are doing with that Blackboard example or Razor's Edge, you are collecting personal data, and then you are asking a third party, in this instance Blackboard, to babysit that personal data. And if you're hiring a babysitter, you need to ensure that you've checked that they are secure, that they comply with the law, that they're going to look after your data in the same way. But in many cases where organizations are falling down, is that they haven't done their check, and they just poured a babysitter off the street and said, look after my children, basically. In data protection law, that is not acceptable. And I think with Blackboard, you're going to see an implication where there will be punitive action against those organizations, probably universities within the UK, that have used that, but their contracts weren't. The contracts that they had with Blackboard weren't compliant with UK law or the GDPR. Jamie said these are some vulnerabilities exploited ransomware to spread across the network. it depends on what ransomware there are. The whole range of ones that come across. The Microsoft, if you go to the Microsoft website, it tells you the current ransomware that are the most prolific, that are the ones that are most successful at this moment in time. It's the graph that tells you around the industries that are being affected.
Yeah, and just to add on that from Jamie, I've seen recently with a school that I'm working with, they've had a 0-day vulnerability essentially just attack them. So something that's not within any of the malware signatures, it can't be protected against from the usual malware protection, and it crawls the network. It starts off with a device and a server that user's connected to and spreads out. And again, that's where network isolation helps and actually locking some of them down. And it's actually, thankfully, with this school I was working with, the person noticed something quickly and they were able to start shutting the devices down to stop the spread. So it's not only about the protection you may implement as part of your technology, your systems and services, but it's also about how you respond, and it's kind of that incident management, is that fire drill, running that. So it's making sure you can respond when it happens if the technical measures can't actually solve the problem for you.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So in terms of wrapping up, there, I think there are a number of takeaways that I just wanted to sort of end on. From an education perspective, the attack surface has grown considerably over the past year. And although you may not have been attacked at this moment in time, there may be, you may be under attack with individuals escalating their privileges. The National Cybersecurity Centre have evidence that education in schools and universities and colleges are being targeted, and at most at risk. The Microsoft report at this moment in time demonstrates that 2/3 of malware attacks are focused on education. The greatest data protection risk at this moment in time for schools is cybersecurity, and cybersecurity of their internal networks. That is without doubt the biggest concern, and something that your data protection officers should be actively trying to manage, because it's their responsibility in law to identify those risks and support the organizations to reduce those risks. If you have time between now and Christmas and you can get hold of one of these games, play Go Fish with your leadership team, because that will open their eyes and educate them in terms of what the key risks are. And if you're desperate for a vulnerability assessment, I'm sure Adam and the team can squeeze one in. So if you feel that you are at risk before the Christmas break and you want to do something about it, then you can have your Christmas break, without the anxiety that you'll be at risk. And going back to the very, very beginning, our app, where we are heading as a technology business, we've more than doubled in size this year as an organization, and we are looking to advance sort of our expertise and provide solutions to our schools that are needed in the areas of data protection and cybersecurity. So if there are things that you think are really missing within the edtech sector, and you want people to build solutions, then get in touch. We are a growing business that has that is privately owned, profitable, and we're looking to use our expertise to really support schools globally with solving these issues and minimizing the risk to them. So on that note, I wanted to say thank you very much for spending your time today and joining us. If you are celebrating Christmas, then have a happy Christmas, a Merry Christmas. If you're not and just celebrating the holidays, then I wish you all the best and hope you get some time to relax. And once again, thank you for your time, and I look forward to you joining us in our webinars in the new year. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.